I thought I'd carry on with the box example and use it to learn some additional things, some fun stuff hopefully. What we're going to do today is apply some appearances to this, and set up a scene, and then we'll put a logo on it, and then we'll do a photorealistic rendering. But to do that, I can't separate them because they're single bodies within the same file. Okay, so in CAD, normally you would have individual component files, and then you would have an assembly file that reference those individual components. Fusion360 has a single file type, but you can have multiple components within that file. So the file itself can be a component, or you can have other components within the file. So if you knew that the file was going to end up having two components at the start, and when you're designing concept ideas, you don't, obviously you don't know that all the time. But if you did know that, then what you would normally do is actually start off by creating a new component. So at the very top level here, you would say new component, and then everything that you created while that component was active. Oh, actually, let's have a look at that. So if I right click on this end and say I want a new component, you can see that the little button there is indicating that this is the active component. So anything that I create now is actually inside this component. Okay, so that is component 1, and inside component 1 it has its own origins, it has its own body, and it has its own sketches. So if I right click on there again and say new component again, and this time I'll just put on the top of here, and if I extrude this, that is now component 2. Okay, so that's how you would go about building an assembly of components. And because they're now components, I can actually move them around, and I can apply joints between them. So if we go back to the box example, we can't move any of these around because they're not components. So ideally we would have started at the beginning by making these as individual components, but as I say, you don't always know that that's what you're going to end up doing, but you can actually promote these to be components. Okay, so if you right click on body 1, you can tell it to create components from bodies, and I'm going to do the same for body 2. So now we have component 1, component 2. Probably a good idea actually to rename these. Okay, so we've got two individual components. Now when you move something, you can actually capture that position in the timeline. Okay, so before that new position, that's where the components were, and you can actually delete this as well. Okay, so you might not want everything to be able to move in here, so it'd be what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the box and I'm going to ground it. Okay, so that's added the ground pin to our timeline. That's telling me that this box is grounded. The lid then is free to move. And we're going to try and move this then to be, so that it's sort of leaning on the box. Probably don't want to do that. Okay, so So what I'm doing is I'm using the move copy tool. I'm choosing this component, and then we have some handles on here. Okay, so we have arrows so we can move it in a single direction. We've got little rotation handles that we can turn it. And the little squares allow you to move it on a plane. Okay. So I'm probably going to want this to sit, and I'm just going to do this visually. I'm just going to lean it on the box at that sort of height, and I'm going to also move it to the side a bit and turn it so it's leaning on the corner of the box. Okay, but I can't do that with the orientation of these handles as they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to change either here. We can set new pivots, or over here in this box as well, and that can be anywhere. So just use this as a reference. So the orientation now of these handles are sort of like laying flat to the surface that we have, the imaginary surface underneath the box. Yeah. So once I've chosen that, I do have to click on the green tick, and now if I look from the top, we can move it in this plane and we can rotate it. Yeah. So what I'm going to want to try and do is make it look like it's leaning on that corner. So probably something like that. Yeah, okay. The other thing that we want to do is give it an appearance. So at the highest level in this file, actually what you can do it here. So you can apply physical materials, especially important if you wanted to do simulation, stress analysis and things, or you can simply change the appearance of something. So you can do it here by right clicking on bodies, on components, on the highest level, and we can choose our material, our appearance from here, and we can apply it. You can apply it to faces, you can apply it to bodies, or to components. Yeah. But what I'm going to do is switch over to the rendering environment, and we can change appearances here. So I'm going to use this 3D ash. Okay, we're going to apply those as our materials, appearances, and I'm also going to apply a decal. On my computer, so I'm going to select the face to put it on, and that looks okay actually. But you can manipulate these, so you can mirror it, you can scale it. Okay, so if I wanted to make it bigger or smaller, put it somewhere in the middle. Okay, and that's black, so you wouldn't be able to see the grain of the wood through it. So I imagine, so our goal here is to make this look realistic. So with that in mind, I'm going to change the opacity of that file. So I'll just lower it a bit so you can see the wood through it. So imagine if we laser engraved that onto the surface of the box. Okay. Now the other thing that's not going to look very realistic in this is the fact that these edges are crisp. So we're going to change that. So let's go back to the design environment. I'm going to box select everything. So I'm selecting all the edges, and then I'm going to go to my fillet tool, and we're going to just round them over a bit. So maybe sort of 0.5 millimeter. So you can see that all the edges in the model have been rounded over by 0.5 millimeter. So this isn't actually, if we go back to the timeline, now have a look at the timeline here, this is not necessarily the best order of doing things in here. Okay, so I might have rounded these over before I'd promoted them to components. Probably would have been a better idea, because this starts to get sort of messy and a bit sort of unnecessarily disorganized if you do things this way. Okay, but for what we're doing now, that's going to be good. I'm going to switch over back to our rendering environment. So the other thing we can do in here is change the scene settings. Okay, so we've got an environment library, so just simply pulling these in here will give you different lighting effects, different moods. Okay, I think let's go with that one. And then on the settings tab, we can change the brightness. Okay. We can also change the orientation. So with this little button here, we can change the orientation of the scene. Okay, so this is moving the lighting around. So somewhere, I suppose somewhere we're gonna maybe somewhere there. We can switch the ground plane on and off. If your model was higher up in the environment, so you'd be able to flatten the ground so it was underneath your model. You can turn reflections on and off. It doesn't necessarily make it look more realistic, or it depends on what you need, I suppose. You can change the focal length of the lens of the camera. Okay, 50mm lens. You can change the exposure. And you can switch on depth of field. Okay, and you can choose how much blur you want there to be in the background, and you can also change the sort of points of center of focus. So I might have my logo as the center of focus. Okay, and you can save these settings that you have as a default as well. So once you've got your scene set up, then we've got our appearances, we've got our scene settings, we've applied the decal. So you can actually, well, the grain of this wood has come in actually orientated the right way, but you could change that if you wanted to. Okay, so if it happens to come in the wrong way, then you'd be able to modify that. Okay, you can render this using this button, but the other thing that you can do is have an in-canvas render. Okay, so this can take a while. If you need to sort of do a bit of trial and error with the settings to come up with something that looks nice, you wouldn't want to do it this way, because it'd take you a really long time. So the way to do it is to do an in-canvas render. So this is pretty quick. I say pretty quick, it'll probably take a few minutes to do this. And then every time I do something new, so if I zoom out a little bit, or if I sort of orientate it, then that sort of resets this in-canvas render, and it has to start again. Yeah. Okay, so once we're happy with the scene settings, decal, etc., I am going to click render. Now, so you can either choose to render it in the cloud, which requires you to sort of buy credits, or you can render it locally. Now with a fairly simple scene like this, it'll render locally, no problem at all. We can specify the size of the image, and we can, like to have a transparent background on that as well. So that's good. Okay, so various different options here as well. Okay, so I'm going to hit render. Let's see how long that takes. Alright, so the rendering is now finished. So I can actually click on the image down here, the bottom left. We can download the image from there. Just going to save it into the downloads folder. And I'm hoping in Inkscape to be able to import it. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so we've got a pretty decent image. So that's how you can bring your photorealistic images into another program, make some really nice looking presentations of your design proposals, etc. So it's a bit of a sort of a fun thing to do with Fusion, get you have something to sort of get your teeth into and have some nice results out of the program. My goal with these tutorials really isn't to teach you, what every button and every option is in Fusion360, but to give you the overall principles of how you would go about doing things and how the program works, because I think it's far more important that you learn the concepts rather than learning what individual buttons do. Because once you understand the concepts, then you can, the program becomes more intuitive, and you can figure out your way to solutions by yourself. Okay, so good luck with that. See you in the next video.